Wynand, Gouws, who heads up our Cape Town office. Wynand has been working on a book, I think, since you joined GMI, Wynand. And the project went through various stages, and this year hit the shelves at Exclusive Books and hit the top 10 in several stores. I know there were pictures going around in the group. So Wynand, over to you, and looking forward to your presentation.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Craig. For context, Craig asked me to share a few thoughts on 200 Beyond. And I think, if anything, there are three important messages that I'd like to share in the course of the presentation. The first is that most in this audience will probably live a lot longer than they anticipated. The second part to that is, if one is living a lot longer, it does mean we need to fundamentally rethink the traditional definition of retirement being a line in the sand. And thirdly, in this longer life, one has to again stand back and relook at your financial planning to actually suit and fit a life 200 and beyond. It's interesting if we look back at the history of retirement. Retirement started in the Roman Empire. And at that point in time, legionaries went to war, and if they returned 20 years after that, they were provided a pension. As you can think, most legionaries or soldiers never actually returned from war. And thus the system didn't actually really start to work up until the early 1920s. In 1920, the era of mass production or industrialization, companies started to fight for employees or fight for labor. In that fight for labor, the pension fund system, as we know today, really started to take off. So in essence, companies were providing pensions in the hope of attracting talent to their particular place of employment. The one key thing that hasn't changed since 1920, so I mean that's in essence almost 100 years back, is the key thing that has not changed is retirement age. So almost 100 years later, and the retirement system as it was developed in 1920 still remains principally in place, where you retire from employment at age 60 or 65, depending on the country you stay in. The one thing that has, however, changed fundamentally is longevity. The easiest is to share a few practical and public examples of how people are living a longer life. This was the most recent. So most of you know Queen Elizabeth lived a very happy life into her mid-90s and passed away at 96. If we do look at one or two other examples, interesting to also note that people are doing stuff very different to our traditional thinking of what retirement should look like. So the guy on the top left-hand side is Warren Buffett. For those that don't know Buffett, he manages one of the largest investment companies in the world and one of the most successful, Berkshire Hathaway. He's currently 92 and continues to head the company that he started. In addition to that, his partner, Charlie Munger, is 98, and they both continue to work side by side in the investment world. Next to them, Richard Maponya. That particular article was written when he was 96. He passed at 99. At the time of writing that article, he still continued active employment, said that he would not retire. He just enjoyed working far too much, or working particularly for his company. And then Madiba, as we know, Madiba started as president in his 70s. So arguably, one of the most important chapters in his life only started at 70. Then people are also completely redefining life after 65. At the bottom left-hand side is Margaret Hirsch. Margaret took the opportunity in COVID to do her MBA. So at the age of 70, she finished her MBA. Most of us normally finish that a lot earlier, but again, proof that you can do a lot of stuff that we didn't traditionally think after age 65. Also, interestingly, people, or it seems like skydiving is quite a thing at the age of 100. If you just go onto Google and say skydive granny at 100, you find a number of pictures of people who decide to go skydiving at 100. So you can continue to also be very active after traditional retirement age. Then some people decide to start a family in their 60s. Yep, that's Richard here. And him and his wife decided to start a family in 65. So just looking at that, it's quite evident that people are living a lot longer and doing stuff that we didn't traditionally think of to do after 65. Now, what does the South African picture look like? On this chart, there's probably three key messages that I want to convey. This is life expectancy since the 1950s. So the first one is the trajectory of the line. So as you can see in that chart, over the last 70 years, there's been a consistent increase in life expectancy. So that's the first key message. The second one is, yes, there are occasional setbacks, and they're normally due to a medical pandemic. The last setback was HIV/AIDS, where we did see a decrease in longevity. And probably, in an update of this chart, you might see a dip in longevity again due to COVID-19. However, the trajectory remains in place. There is a structural shift to living longer. The third important point I want to leave behind is the quantum of the increase in life. So if you look at 1950, people lived up to their 40s, and currently that's about 65. So in the last 50 or 70 odd years, life expectancy has increased by 25 years. That's about 4 years or 1 year of life being added for every 4 years that you're alive. That's quite fundamental to think about. Now, what does it look like for the broader population, the insured population? So most of the people listening in this audience would be part of the insured population. As we know, insurers have got a decent grip of mortality when people pass because they insure people, and they've got decent statistics as to when those insured lives pass away. Again, on this slide, a few key messages I want to leave behind. So what this illustrates is an example. If you're 65, how long are you expected to live on average? So firstly, what you can see is females live longer than men, and that's a global phenomenon. So on average, females live about 4 years longer than men, and it's important to plan for that. The second key point is the older you get, the longer you are expected to live because you've outlived some of life's challenges. The other important one is many people in this audience is in a relationship, be it a partner, marriage, doesn't matter. But if you're in a relationship, it's expected that one of you will live into your 90s. So interesting to note there, a couple currently age 65, one of you is expected to live up to 92. And a couple aged 85, one is expected to live up to age 96. So again, interesting, if you look at the data, it says that most people should be planning for life into their 90s. If we dig a bit deeper, that's the average data, but let's look a bit more in the detail. So what this tells us is that 50% of men will live up to 82, and 10% of men, yes, 1 in 10 listening in this call will live up to 95. Females, 50% will live up to 87, and 1 in 10, yes, again, 10% of people listening in this call will live up to 100. So the facts are overwhelming. The reality is that most people listening in this call will live a lot longer than what they planned or expected. This does challenge the fundamental belief that retirement's a line in the sand. So if you're going to be living another 30 years after retirement, it's important to rethink retirement being a event or one chapter, and reframing that thinking to saying, after retirement, what are my multiple chapters? That's quite important. The earlier one starts us, the better, but even at retirement or just before retirement, it's important to really stand back and think and saying, what does my life look like after retirement? What are the chapters I'm planning for? And that it could be different. It's different for everybody. But 3 ideas to leave behind is, for many people, it might look something like this, where the first part of retirement could be what I call the twilight years. So that's many of those examples where people decide to continue working after the traditional age of 65. That could be in current employment, it could be in consulting, it could be following a hobby or a passion, or it could be starting something fundamentally new. But the planning required, if you still continue to work after the traditional retirement age, is very different to people that decide to stop working completely at retirement. So it's important to think about that chapter. What does the first chapter look like after retirement? There's no right or wrong. It's really just about understanding what your plans are. And once you know that, one can develop a financial plan to support that. After that first chapter, after the twilight years, some people may then decide what we call now refinement. So that's to enjoy the days of retirement, to enjoy life by the sea with the grandkids, traveling, whatever that is again for you. Importantly, for many people, there could be what I call the caring years of retirement. That's where later in life you might need additional Medicare, might decide to move into a retirement village. And again, that's fundamentally different to early years of retirement. And it requires different financial planning and thinking. So importantly, if you think about longer life, the fact that you will be living potentially another 30 years, one then needs to stand back and saying, what does my chapters look like after retirement? Once you have those plans in place, one can then start developing a financial plan to support that longer life. I don't have a lot of time to chat through the detail, but I'm just going to leave behind 3 or 4 key principles. Those same principles are quoted in the article that Maya asked me to write in The Big Issue, which can be found on shelf or on the street corners supporting the unemployed. So I'll leave the thoughts behind. If you're interested, you can obviously buy the detail. It's all in my book, or alternatively, pick up a copy of The Big Issue. The first part, living a longer life, it reinforces the importance of insurance. So a staggering 1.9 million death claims were paid during COVID-19. And I think many people stood back again and saying, do I have appropriate insurance? And do I have appropriate protection to provide an income if I can't work? That is so much more important if you're living a longer life. If you're going to be living 30 years after retirement, it's important to provide appropriately for your family and to provide appropriately for yourself in case you can't work. So any good financial plan starts with appropriate insurance and protecting yourself against life. Living this longer life also means we've got so much more time to compound or to invest and to benefit from compounding. Very simply illustrated, here's that benefit of compounding. So if one saves 1,000 Rand, after the first year, you'd roughly get 1,000 Rand growth on that 1,000 per month that you saved. If one looks at the benefit of compounding, that amount keeps growing and growing, and you keep earning interest on an ever bigger and bigger amount. If you look at year 20, it's staggering to note that in year 20, you will earn 150 times the growth that you would have earned in year 1. And that's the benefit of compounding. It's earning interest on an ever-growing and bigger amount. So if you think about retiring 65, living another 30 years, even in retirement, you've got 30 years of compounding left. Many people on this call might be in their 40s or 50s, which means you probably have 50 years plus left of compounding and making that work for you. Also very important to be sure you protect your money against inflation. As Ronald Reagan said, inflation is as violent as a mugger, as frightening as an armed robber, and as deadly as a hitman. As we all know, the cost of goods and services increase. Probably most evident at the moment is the price of petrol. But if we look at 1 or 2 examples, in the 1970s, a burger would have cost you only 30 cents. Currently, probably if you go back to the Spur, you'd pay anything of 82 Rand or above for that same burger. So it's important to ensure that your money keeps abreast of inflation or actually beats inflation. You want your money to grow at a pace higher than inflation. This also becomes so much more important where you need to protect the buying power of your money for a longer time frame or longer time after retirement. The most important way to do that is to earn appropriate growth on your investments. That doesn't mean that you need to take excessive risk. It's just about earning an appropriate return. All that I illustrate in this example is the benefit of taking a bit of additional risk and the impact of taking additional risk over time. So back to that time frame, many people on this call in their 40s or 50s have a 50-year time horizon. So 50 years is not as long as you may think. It might be your planning horizon. Look at the difference 1% return makes in a 50-year time frame. So if you invest 100,000 Rand, earning a 10% return, your capital would be worth 11 million Rand in 50 years. That same 100,000 Rand, earning 1% more, would grow to 18 million Rand. That's a staggering 6.7 million Rand difference return by taking 1% additional return. So important to take appropriate risk, particularly in planning for a longer life. Tax also becomes increasingly important, and importantly to ensure that you plan to use all the tax breaks and hacks available, be it retirement, annuities, tax-free savings, interest exemptions. And quite often we find that people only plan for one person in a relationship to provide for retirement. It's very important for both people to utilize all the tax benefits to their advantage. I very simply illustrate that in the next page. So someone that saved 10 million Rand and that didn't plan for both spouses or split the investments and retirement savings across both partners would earn an income in retirement of 33,000 Rand. If one planned appropriately and used available tax breaks for both partners, then that income on the same 10 million Rand increases to about 41,000 Rand. That's very simply as a result of paying less tax in retirement and planning for both partners towards retirement. Importantly, also then wrapping up this longer life, you need to get your house in order. This is about all the stuff you have, looking at estate plan, ensuring your will is in place. And I think, again, this was highlighted during COVID-19. It can become quite complex, but the start is really just ensuring your will is in place and ensuring that you've got a decent understanding of your estate, all the stuff you have, all the stuff you owe, and importantly, death taxes, which could be quite staggering. So estate plan becomes increasingly important in living this longer life, and it should start way before retirement. In conclusion, I think I've probably just overran my 15 minutes. Thanks for the patience, Craig. But in conclusion, just the three thoughts again. So firstly, as I've illustrated, most of us will probably live a lot longer than we anticipated. Living that longer life and living another 30 years after 65 requires rethinking retirement being a line in the sand. It's firstly important to start thinking about what your next chapters are. What does your life look like after 65? And depending on those chapters, one can start developing a financial plan to support your life chapters after 65. The principles I illustrated, they've always been there. They just become increasingly relevant in living this longer life. Thank you so much.